So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. This coming weekend is going to be St. Patrick's Day, and we're going to talk about that today on this program. We have a great guest to do that. He's an author who wrote a book called St. Patrick of Ireland. We're going to get to that in a second. But friends, thank you for tuning in. I know you're busy people. Every one of you are zipping around here and there, taking your kids all over the place, grandparents as well. You're doing the same thing. It means a lot that you have tuned in. So thank you very much. If you like what you hear, and I hope you do, I ask that you share it with your friends, your family, everybody, because we're trying to build an audience, not so much for Dr. Bob, but for the wonderful people that I bring on my show. And today, it is an extreme pleasure to welcome Dr. Phillip Freeman to the Hamilton Review. Dr. Freeman, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. And Dr. Freeman is a professor of history. He's at Pepperdine University, which is up in Malibu, not too far from where we are right now. He specializes in medieval and ancient history. I told him in our pre-conversation that's a very rare and different kind of specialty. I think hopefully he'll tell us a little bit about that. But Dr. Freeman, what I like to do with my guests is I like to say, introduce yourself. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to you at this point in time and ask you just to tell a little bit about who you are, your background, your education, and why, what was that spark, that passion, that idea that went off in your brain that that caused you to become a professor of ancient history and medieval history. So, Professor Freeman, you're on.
Well, thank you so much. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. My father was actually an Air Force officer. So we lived in Georgia for about 2 weeks, and then we started moving all over the United States and Europe. And some of the places we lived in Europe were southern Italy, and we traveled around. And so as a child, as a young teenager, I got to see, Pompeii and Roman ruins and things like that. So I think that planted the seed, although back at the time, I think I was a whole lot more interested in Boy Scouts and anything but history. But it did definitely plant a seed, and so I became more and more interested. I always loved history. I loved it in high school, and then when I went to college, I started learning more and more and decided to major in it and took ancient languages, and it was great. And traveled, did archaeological field school in Greece, and traveled around Italy and Britain, and it was just it was great. And so finally, I went to get my PhD at Harvard, and I got a PhD both in classics, which is ancient Greece and Roman studies, and also in Celtic studies. So I got this sort of dual PhD. And so since then, since I graduated in the mid 90s or early 90s, I have been a professor teaching history and literature and religion and just about everything from the ancient and medieval world. And I've always had a special interest in Ireland. I just think it's a fascinating culture and a great place. I've visited many times. I recommend to anybody to go over and visit Ireland. It's just a magical place. And so I decided to write this book on St. Patrick, and have written several actually on Patrick and Celtic, early Celtic Christianity. Just because it's such an amazing thing, such a largely unknown area. And you're right, there aren't many professors of ancient history. I mean, certainly the only one at Pepperdine. There are a few at UCLA and USC and things like that, but there's not many of us out there. But I tell you, it's just been a wonderful life. There's absolutely nothing more fun than getting up in front of a classroom of students and teaching them. Most of them are eager young minds ready to learn, and it's just been been absolutely great.
I think that when I think about this, the medieval period is a period we call the Dark Ages historically, or just amongst ourselves. And so you when you think about that, it's almost like the history is not there. There's almost like there's this gap in our understanding. Of course, a lot about the Greco-Roman, because they wrote, and we have manuscripts and what have you. and of course, biblical times 2,000 years ago. But then you have this incredible, thing. So I do think that medieval history, in my mind, is fascinating. There are a lot of crazy names, and sometimes hard to keep track of all these people. And I don't think that there's good, original documents to go from. So I sometimes wonder about how you put it all together. How does that happen?
Well, I tell you, medieval history, if anybody's interested in being a historian, is a great field because it's been ignored for so long. But people are discovering and learning more and more. They're using things like St. Patrick's letters as historical sources and are able to use these wonderful primary sources that are out there just waiting. So many things are written in Latin and haven't even been translated. So it's a great field. It's certainly a lot of virgin territory there if anybody is interested in it. And it really sets the stage. You know, the ancient world, of course, hugely influential, but the medieval world sets the stage for the Reformation, for the Renaissance, for the modern world. And so it's all part of that continuity. That's important to understand where we came from as people from Europe mostly and America.
Yeah, and it's hundreds of years long. So you're right. There is probably a treasure trove which is out there to be found. Um, the the book you wrote and that you alluded to is called Saint Patrick of Ireland. It's a biography of Saint Patrick, and you do have some original documents. You have his confessions. You have other letters he wrote to the particular. What was that guy's name? He was not a.
Herodotus.
I'm sorry.
Soldier Herodotus, yes.
That guy, yes,
Yeah.
Karatakis. And but the interesting thing, and I have to say, Professor, that as a kid growing up, there's a lot of mythology that surrounds St. Patrick's Day. I mean, a lot of it. I mean, between the leprechauns and the four-leaf clovers and the snakes. By the way, did he really drive out the snakes of Ireland?
I'm afraid not. No,
He didn't. Okay.
no,
Who
no.
did?
Nobody. There have never been any snakes in Ireland. It's snakes always get a bad rap in ancient literature and religion. They, the snake in the Garden of Eden or whatever. So snakes represent evil, and so Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland is just a way to say he drove out the old evil pagan ways. But no, he didn't actually do that.
He didn't do it. Okay, so I just have this vision of him at the seashore, just these hordes of snakes, just heading over to Britain or
Sure.
heading over to America or wherever. But so the mythology is pretty vast, is pretty robust when you think about it. But the truth of Patrick, and this is something that I have discovered really as an adult in my life, because I never really thought about Patrick other than St. Patrick's Day. And if you didn't wear green, you got what? What happened to you if you didn't wear green? You got
Yep.
pinched. Yeah, I think that's probably politically incorrect now to pinch.
Yeah.
I certainly that doesn't go over too well in my office anymore. But I do wear green on St. Patrick's Day. I want you to know. But that being said, tell us who Patrick was, because I think this is such a fascinating story. First of all, let me just say one thing. He wasn't Irish.
He was not Irish, and that's probably going to upset a lot of listeners out there. But he was actually British and Roman, depending on how you look at it. He was born sometime, oh, maybe in the 390s, around the year 400, in the Roman province of Britain. And he came from a wealthy family. His family had estates and they owned slaves. And so he was a Roman citizen, very proudly a Roman citizen. But Rome fell apart actually not too long after Patrick was born. But he and everybody else in Britain maintained that idea that they were still Romans. But it may surprise people, he was an atheist actually as a young man. His father was a deacon, his grandfather was a priest, but he abandoned the Christian religion as a teenager, said he wanted nothing to do with it. But one day, when he was about 16 years old, he was kidnapped by Irish pirates who took him back over to Ireland and they made him a slave. And so he served over in Ireland as a slave, just a terrible, terrible situation for about 6 years. And it was during those 6 years that he rediscovered his faith, rediscovered his Christian faith. And he began to pray, he said, sometimes 100 times a day, sometimes again 100 times at night. And then finally, after 6 years, he had a dream that he believed came from God, and it said, Patrick, it's time to leave. And so, after a few of these dreams, Patrick leaves. He flees slavery across all of Ireland, about almost 200 miles. He finds a ship. He gets on board. Finally, they're very reluctant to take him on board. He escapes back to Britain. He actually sees his parents again, and they're thrilled to have him back and just so glad. And then he hears another call from God that says, Patrick, I want you to go back to Ireland. And Patrick says, You've got to be kidding me. And so he has this dream again and again. It's kind of like in the Bible where we have Joseph and Samuel having dreams, the same sort of thing. But he eventually goes back. He gets training as a Christian priest, and he goes back and spends the rest of his life as a missionary, working among the Irish, trying to convert them to Christianity, trying to minister to the Christians who are already there, who actually are mostly slaves.
So one of the things that I think about when I figured out that he was not Irish, because I think most people think of him as being Irish, quintessentially Irish. Um, what, in fact, his name, Patrick, tell us the derivation of that name, because it's interesting.
Well, his name, it was officially Patricius. It was a Roman name. It was actually a fairly common Roman name. It means somebody from the upper classes. It's kind of like being named John or Peter nowadays, a very, very common name. So they would have called him Patricius at home. But in Ireland, he was called Padraig or something like that because they changed the language a lot. And so he takes on an Irish name.
So the name Patrick, friends, is not derived from any Celtic source. Is actually derived from Latin source, and and I found that to be interesting because when we think about the name Patrick, we immediately think Ireland. At least I do. Um,
Yes.
so one of the things I thought about when I thought about, okay, he was a slave and then he came back and then he went back. I think about a phenomenon called the Stockholm syndrome.
Mm.
Can you address that? Was he suffering from the Stockholm syndrome?
I don't think
And
so.
by the
I
way,
think
maybe you should explain what the Stockholm syndrome is,
well, the
first of all.
Stockholm, it's when you start to sympathize with your captors and start to identify with them. I think Patrick never developed that during those 6 years. I think if anything, developed probably a deeper disdain for the Irish. But his when he finally went back, it wasn't because I don't think that he was just eager to go back and excited at all. He felt a call from God, and he really would have preferred just to stay in Britain, but when God calls you, you can't really say no. And so he went back for to minister to the people who had almost killed him, who had enslaved him, and treated him just horribly. So it was actually quite a remarkable thing for him to do, for anybody to do.
Yeah. He he was, excuse me, he was taken out of Britain as a slave, a young boy, a teenager, about 16. He got back about 22, 23. And then there was a period of time, a decade of his life where what you call the kind of the silent decade. Can
Yeah.
you can you talk to our listeners a little bit about that period of time and your thoughts about what happened to him?
Sure. And he's in his early 20s when he gets back to Britain. And he wanted to go, after he gets his call to go back to Ireland, this call from God. He couldn't just, I mean, he could have just gone over, but he wanted to do it right. He wanted to get trained as a Christian minister, to be ordained in the priesthood before he went over to Ireland. So I'm pretty sure he spent those hidden years in training, probably studying with a bishop in Britain, maybe in Gaul, modern day France. It's hard to know. But he was, training and working his way up and getting ordained and following all the proper procedures before he would go back to Ireland.
And so that decade, and so mainly you think it was in Gaul. Did he go back to Rome at any
Uh,
time?
some people say he went to Rome. I mean, my guess is he was either in Gaul or even more probably in Britain itself. There
Yeah.
were plenty of places where he could have studied. I mean, there were no seminaries in those days. So the way you learned was you attached yourself to the household of a bishop. And you learned in that way. And so I think that's probably what he did.
And he was when he decided he wanted to go back to Ireland, he that was a push for him. He had to convince people.
He did. His parents absolutely were furious at him, angry and heartbroken. And so he had to do this. He had to leave his family. Uh, the letters that he write never mention the brothers or sisters. He may have well been an only child. And certainly he didn't have much support from the British Christians, the British church, because they had suffered at the hands of the Irish and slave raiders. And so the Irish were considered subhuman. By the British, by the Romans, and so he was very much opposed by the institutional church for doing this, but they very reluctantly ordained him and sent him back over as a missionary to Britain,
He was
Ireland. Sorry.
to Ireland. Yes, we got to get the right country there. Yeah, he did. I think just going back a little bit, I one of the things that I found interesting in the story is when he did escape, when he basically walked away from his slavery, which was so, you would think that there would be a little bit more oversight of him and that they would not, that they would be suspicious that that might happen. The fact that he just walked away and went close to 200 miles, which is incredible. I think you in your book, you state that he typically traveled during the night and he had to keep away from any towns or anything like that. It's hard that 200 miles is a long way. And
Sure.
he found his way to the coast and found his way to the ship. The one of the visions that he had apparently was that he was told that in a vision that your ship is waiting.
Yes.
That to me was it's like, okay, it's right here. And then he went to the ship and he was rejected.
Yes, he was. The captain, Patrick says, please take me on board. And the captain of the ship immediately says, no, there's no way we're taking you on board. I mean, because it was illegal and against all custom and law to help a runaway slave. And the captain knew pretty much immediately that's exactly what he was. And so he sends Patrick away. And so Patrick, walks away from the ship. He's in huge trouble. He's absolutely got nowhere to go. He has a death price on his head. No one can help him. But then the captain changes his mind and says, "All right, Patrick, come on back. We'll take you." And so that's when he sails back to Britain.
That had to have been those moments when he was waiting for that and was inexplicable why he changed his mind. I guess he needed more help on the boat.
Probably.
But I'm sure that those moments in his life, he thought, am I insane? Am I hearing voices that are not true? And so then all of a sudden, boom, because they were imminently leaving, that ship was about ready to depart,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. It was. Yeah.
Um, so one of the interesting things I found in reading your book, and something that wasn't clear to me before, was the fact that 6-year period of time that he was absconded and away from his education in Britain, um, he really never got educated. Obviously, in Ireland, he was a slave. He was tending the sheep out in the countryside. So that was a big hole in his education. And one of the things that Patrick, I think, demonstrated in his confessions and other things was that he was a person who he did not feel himself to be a learned man. Um,
Mhm.
can you speak to that?
Sure. When Patrick was kidnapped around the age of 16, had spent 6 years in Ireland. He basically missed, what we might think of as high school and the first few years of college. So we could say he has the equivalent of, say, a middle school education. He knows the basics. He knows how to read, knows how to write, but he absolutely did not have the polish that all of the other bishops and priests would have. They would have had several more years of education. They would have been great at writing and persuading and all of this. And so Patrick always feels this great inferiority to the church hierarchy, to his fellow priests. It's always a struggle for him, and he was certainly, as we see in his letters, a man who was very sensitive to this. He suffered greatly from depression, from anxiety. He really had some internal struggles in life.
Yeah, and I think his fluency in Latin, which was the language of the church at that time, was very, very marginal. He wasn't that fluent, correct?
Right. I mean, he knew the basics of Latin, and I've translated his Latin letters, and they're okay. They remind me very much of my grandmother, who grew up in the hills of Mississippi and only got through eighth grade. She would write me letters when I was a young man, when I was a child, and they were, from the heart and beautiful, but they were, they were not well done grammatically. And I think Patrick is a lot like that.
Yeah. So that was a disadvantage of him for him in the hierarchical, strata of the church. But
Right.
my impression, and you can and help me here. My impression was this humility that he I think he walked in really allowed him to speak to the common man, and particularly the common man of Ireland.
Yes, I think he was absolutely somebody who could identify with the downtrodden, with the downcast. I mean, he'd been raised in the lap of luxury, and he spent 6 years as a slave, so he knew what it was like to be treated as the absolute bottom of the rung of society. He knew what it was like to have everything taken away, to have education taken away, and so I think it helped him in a way he certainly never would have expected to relate to the downtrodden people of life.
I think so, and I think that made him more powerful with the people, and allowed him also. I think my impression was that he was not a threat. He didn't he wasn't perceived as a threat to the Irish people, and there was hierarchical tribes and different
Right.
clans in Ireland, and speak to that because we think
Sure.
about uh, Patrick going to Ireland and evangelizing, but how did that happen? It wasn't like he held a big tent meeting or anything
No.
of that nature. He basically was more of a person by person, and he was obviously very shrewd when it came to politically ingratiating himself to the authorities that were in Ireland.
Well, Patrick had a huge advantage. There were other missionaries working in Ireland, but they were Roman and they were working mostly in the south. Patrick was mostly in the north, but he knew the culture. He knew the language. He certainly learned Irish while he was there as a slave. So he was able to go and move. And in Ireland, politically, there was no like United Kingdom of Ireland. There was no high king at this time. There were at least 100, 150 individual tribes, absolutely independent, warring constantly. It would be like, like there's a tribe of Santa Monica, there's a tribe of Malibu, there's a tribe of Thousand Oaks. And so Patrick was moving around these different tribes of Ireland, and he had to give gifts and basically bribe his way into the king, whoever the little ruler of that area was. And so he spent really basically his family's fortune on these bribes to be able to preach and to minister to the people there in the different tribes as he moved about, bit by bit. And so there were no giant tent meetings or anything like that. It was very much a one-on-one and small group sort of operation.
That to me is fascinating because he really did cover Ireland. He made his way, and obviously there was a point where his reputation must have kicked in, and people began to know who he was and respect him as that person. The fact he was maybe not fluent in Latin, but he did know the common language of the Irish people. That certainly was a gigantic advantage for him in terms of ministering. But
Absolutely.
he was ministering, I think when we think back about those times, and you write in your book so beautifully. By the way, friends, the name of the book is called St. Patrick of Ireland. It is published by Simon and Schuster. It is readily available you find it on Google if you're looking for it, Amazon. Excellent book. I recommend that you all pick it up and read it. But one of the things a good chapter that you have in this book, a lot of good chapters, but one of the interesting chapters that you have is about the religions of Ireland at that time. The druids were the ones who I guess were the leaders, both men and women. I didn't know that.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so tell us a little bit about what he was up against in terms of religiosity in Ireland during his ministry.
Well, the Irish were very much like the Romans or the Greeks. They had hundreds, if not thousands, of different gods that they worshipped. There were gods of water, gods of the air, you name it. There was a god for something, and it was the druids who were a priestly class of the ancient Celts of the Irish. Who were the ministers? Who they were the scientists, they were philosophers, they were priests, they were sacrificers, and so Patrick had to go over, and he certainly had to work with them. He never actually mentions the Druids in his work, but we know from just later stories that some of the Druids were disciples of Patrick. They listened to him. They were convinced. There aren't, Patrick had a very hard time in Ireland. He was beaten up regularly and re-enslaved for a couple of weeks and things like that. But he didn't seem to suffer that sort of persecution from the Druids that we might expect. It seems like they were actually maybe listening a little bit more to Patrick than others. But it was a world full of gods, really. Every spring had a god, every grove had a god. And so it's still, if you go over to Ireland now, the holy springs dedicated to Patrick or Bridget or whatever, in the old days were dedicated to different gods. And so it was a very religious place, but it was a place that was where the idea of Christianity, of a single God, a God who actually loved you, that would have been such an odd notion to the Irish.
Yeah, no, and I think that he was really battling uphill in this and these. Obviously, when you go into a country and there's religion established, this is in the DNA almost. You don't necessarily just kind of go, oh, this is another idea, and people adjust to it immediately. It takes a lot of time to really consume that and really think about it and digest it, if you will. One of the interesting things that you say in your book, and maybe talks a little bit more about his ministry, was the fact that he ministered to the fringes, and I'm quoting you, the fringes of the society, end of quote. Um, why was that? He seemed to make inroads with the people. I mean, certainly initially he was dealing with the slaves who had been taken out of Britain by the Irish, and they had been Christianized in Britain. Tell us a little bit about the fringes of the society.
I think that Patrick's experience as a slave himself really shaped him, and so he spent a lot of his time ministering to slaves, to the people who were very poor, to women who were definitely on the fringes of society. I mean, some of his converts, some of his people were, of the nobility. He talks about the sons and daughters of Irish kings who are his followers, but really most of them were people who had a very difficult time, and so he was able to move and to talk to them. And again, especially the women. He realized what a really difficult world it was that they lived in, and so he made special efforts to try to help them however he could.
Yeah. You mentioned the women, and he worked with, I think the reason why he was working with the women is because of their place in the culture that time was quite debased. And men could have more than one wife. And there was a lot of, the women were kind of consigned to very, basic, they had kids and they raised kids, and that was kind of it. Certainly that seemed to be maybe the underbelly of the pantheism that they were living in that world that they were living at that time.
Yeah, I think so. He and also he realized, like a lot of, I think, early Christian missionaries and a lot of early Christian workers, including Paul, if you read his letters, Paul worked a lot with women. I think he realized that was, practically an entry point into families, into communities, was through the women.
Yeah, and ultimately, as they say, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world.
Yes.
And I think that even Constantine, right? Going back to Constantine, you're the scholar. Tell us about Constantine and why he became a Christian, because it was his mother, if I'm not mistaken. Can you help us
Yeah,
there?
Yeah, in the early 300s, Constantine, who had not had much interest in religion really at all, becomes a Christian, the first of the Christian emperors, and his mother, Helena, was, I think, a big influence on him. Mothers so often are, and then Helena becomes a great influence on him for the rest of his life. And so the establishment of Christianity in Rome, it depended actually a lot on the women, women like Helena.
And I think Helena went to Jerusalem too, and I think
She did.
she established some churches over there. Is that true?
It's true. She went to Jerusalem, Bethlehem. She founded churches, built churches. Yeah, she was very important.
Yeah, in the ancient promised land, you would call it, I suppose. Well, so what do you say to people who are going to celebrate St. Patrick's Day this weekend? Any thoughts or comments to them?
Well, I mean, go out and have fun in moderation if you like, but give a thought, give a moment to the real St. Patrick, who was just an amazing man, who was probably totally different than most people think about. A man of great compassion, a man of who really dedicated his life to spreading the gospel.
That's right. Are you going to go out into Chicago and paint the river and throw dye into
Probably
the
not.
river?
Let's see. No, probably not. I don't know. I'm not a late night person at all, but that's yeah, I've been to Chicago when they do dye the river green and it's quite something.
Yeah, it's crazy. And are you going to be in New York City too for the St. Patrick's Day parade?
No, I'll be in California. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So I want to ask a couple before we turn off this program. I'd like to ask a couple of these myths that you have. Okay, the leprechauns. Where is that myth from?
Leprechauns come from the pre-Christian, the pagan Christian religion of Ireland. The stories about little people. You get these all around the world. Actually, they have them in Iceland too. Stories about the little people who live under the ground and have magical powers. That's a fairly common sort of thing in Ireland. So that's where the leprechauns come from. Yeah, so that's myth number one. Yeah.
So and what about the four-leaf clover? I understand that he used that as instructional. Is that true or not true?
Well, it's a three-leaf clover, actually. Is Yeah, four-leaf clover we find is good luck, but I mean the story goes that the shamrock, the three-leaf clover, that Patrick said, this is what God is like, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's three different leaves, but it's one plant. And so the story goes that he did that, but honestly, that story comes along centuries later. We have no idea if Patrick did that or not. It's actually a great idea, and I could see him doing it, but we don't know if he
You don't
did or
know.
not.
Okay. Any other myths about this guy that we haven't hit? I don't know.
Oh, we did the snakes, the shamrocks. No, that's about it.
Okay, well, I think the Blarney Stone. Okay, we the Blarney Stone, is that St. Patrick as well or not?
I mean, no, that comes along after St. Patrick, but yeah, you can go and kiss the Blarney Stone. A lot of fun to do. Lots of people do it every year, but nothing to do with St. Patrick, I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
Yeah, I have kissed the Blarney Stone. And if I remember, you have to lay on your back and you have to stretch your neck out.
Yeah,
And you have to really want to do it.
you really do.
You have to really want to do it. No, I have to say your love of Ireland is equal to mine. I went to Ireland and I have to say first of all, the people are great. It's a lot, they're fun loving and and you certainly feel at home and welcome there by the citizens of Ireland. And I certainly I have to be kind because I have a ton of Irish friends out there. But no, it's a lot of fun to go to Ireland. And people, whether you like Patrick or not, you should go to Ireland just for fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great place. Everybody's got a cousin in America, and everybody you run into in Ireland. Yep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, listen, Dr. Phillip Freeman, you have been a treat to have on the show. The book that he wrote is called St. Patrick of Ireland. Pick it up. Is a very interesting, and you're going to learn a lot about St. Patrick that you do not know. I promise you. So, friends, Dr. Freeman, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And friends, this is Dr. Bob Hamilton signing off. You have been listening to the Hamilton Review. Until next time, be well. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.